He thought the black card would end the conversation before it even began. Instead, it was the first time in years anyone had made Ethan Cole feel small. The chandeliers of Marlowe House spilled warm gold over crystal glasses, polished silver, and the kind of quiet wealth that never needed to introduce itself. On a Friday night in Midtown Manhattan, the city's most expensive restaurant hummed with low voices, old money laughter, and the soft clink of scotch over ice. Ethan Cole sat at the center of it all like he belonged there because, in every measurable way, he did. 38 years old. Self-made. A tech founder turned investor with a net worth that business magazines kept revising upward every quarter. His charcoal Tom Ford suit fit like a private decision. His steel watch flashed once beneath the light when he reached for his bourbon. Around him, 3 men from his inner circle were halfway through a $12,000 dinner and already sliding into that smug, familiar mood rich men mistook for charm. Then Claire Bennett approached the table, and something in the room shifted so slightly that only the observant would have noticed. She wore the standard black and white uniform every server at Marlowe House wore, but somehow it looked less like a uniform on her and more like a line she had agreed to cross for the evening. 27. Blonde hair pulled low at the nape of her neck. Pale skin, clear blue-gray eyes, posture so straight it made everyone else seem careless. She moved with a kind of calm precision that didn't belong to someone juggling 5 tables on a Friday rush. She set down a fresh glass beside Ethan's right hand without a sound. "Your bourbon, sir," she said, voice soft, level, unmistakably American, with the kind of clean East Coast cadence that made people listen without realizing they were doing it. Ethan looked up from his phone for barely a second, but that second lingered. "You remembered," he said. Claire gave a small nod. 2 cubes. Not 3. One of his friends let out a low laugh. "Now that's service." Another, already rosy from wine, leaned back in his chair and looked Claire over with the lazy arrogance of a man who had never once been told no by anyone he considered beneath him. "Pretty, too," he murmured, loud enough to be heard. "Always nice when the staff comes with atmosphere." Claire didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She didn't smile harder the way some women did when they needed a tip and a shift to survive. She simply placed the final appetizer plate in front of the man who'd spoken and said, "Careful, sir. The dish is hot." Ethan should have said something then. He knew that. But silence had become one of the privileges of wealth. Let someone else embarrass themselves. Let the room sort itself out around your comfort. So he did what he usually did. Nothing. Claire turned to leave, but as she pivoted, her gaze passed briefly over the table and landed on the black rectangle resting near Ethan's hand. The American Express Centurion card. Matte. Heavy. Famous enough to be its own language. She looked at it for less than a heartbeat, then moved on. Ethan watched her walk back toward the service station through the amber light, expression unreadable. "You know," his friend Grant said, swirling his red wine. "Women like that always act offended until you hand them the right number." The table chuckled. Ethan lifted his glass, but didn't drink. Across the room, Claire tucked a loose order slip into her apron, checked a ticket, and spoke quietly to a nervous busboy who nearly dropped a tray. She steadied it with one hand, nodded once, and sent him on his way. No drama. No performance. "You're thinking about it," Grant said, catching Ethan's look. Ethan gave the faintest smile. Not warm. Not kind. Just amused enough to be dangerous. "Thinking about what?" Grant leaned in. "The test." And Ethan, without taking his eyes off the waitress who hadn't once looked impressed, let his thumb slide over the edge of the black card as if the night had just finally become interesting. Claire did not look back, and somehow that made it worse. Ethan sat there with 2 fingers still resting on the edge of the black card, the weight of it suddenly heavier than metal should have been. Around him, the table buzzed with the low amusement of men who mistook discomfort for entertainment. Grant smirked into his wine. "Come on, Cole. You are not backing out now." Ethan lifted his bourbon and took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the service station across the room. Claire was speaking to the sommelier, nodding once, then turning to collect a tray of entrees with the same unhurried precision that made every other server seem frantic by comparison. She had heard enough to understand exactly what kind of game this was. That much was clear. And still, she had not reacted. That, more than anything, irritated him. Most people did one of 3 things when money entered the room. They leaned toward it. They flinched from it. Or they performed for it. Claire Bennett had done none of the above. Relax, Ethan said finally, his voice even. I am not buying anything. Grant gave a dry laugh. That is exactly what rich men say 5 seconds before they try. Across from him, Victor loosened his tie and grinned. Maybe she is smarter than she looks. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Maybe she is smarter than you. That drew a few surprised glances and a brief silence, but only for a moment. Then the next course arrived. Claire returned carrying 2 plates balanced along one forearm, another in her free hand. The scent of rosemary, butter, and seared filet cut through the expensive haze of the room. She set Ethan's plate in front of him first. 8 ounces, medium rare, exactly as he ordered it every time he came to Marlowe House. She remembered details without making a show of remembering them. Your filet, Mr. Cole, she said. Then she turned slightly and placed the others in front of the men beside him. Grant smiled up at her with that same careless arrogance. You know, Claire, is it? He glanced at her name tag like he had just discovered it, though he had clearly read it earlier. A woman like you could make more in one night if you stopped carrying plates and started taking opportunities. Ethan watched her face. There it was again, that almost imperceptible stillness. Not wounded, not angry, measured. Claire adjusted the position of a fork that had shifted half an inch out of line, then looked directly at Grant. A man like you should learn the difference between opportunity and assumption. Victor nearly choked on his drink. Grant blinked, smile faltering as the words landed with a softness that somehow made them sting more. Claire did not wait for a reply. She turned to Ethan. Would you like fresh peppers, sir? Ethan looked up at her. Close now. He noticed things he had missed before. The faint crease near her wrist where an old watch usually sat. The neat handwriting on the corner of the order pad tucked into her apron. The way she held eye contact without challenge, but never with deference. No, he said. Then, after a beat, actually yes. She nodded and reached into her apron for the peppermill. As she leaned in just enough to season the plate, Ethan placed the black card on the linen beside his glass, slow and deliberate, not pushing it toward her yet, just letting it sit there like a loaded thought. Claire's hand paused for half a second. Fresh pepper dusted the air, dark and fragrant. That is good. Thank you, Ethan said. She stopped. Set the mill down. Her gaze lowered once to the card, then rose to his face. The restaurant seemed to narrow around them. Somewhere behind her, a glass clinked. A server laughed too loudly. But at that table, in that breath of silence, Ethan could feel the moment forming like a storm behind closed doors. And for the first time that evening, he realized he was not the only one deciding how this would go. Claire held his gaze for one breath longer than politeness required, then reached for the black card. Grant leaned back with a satisfied grin, already certain he understood what came next. Victor exchanged a look with the others, the kind men shared when they believed the world was about to confirm their worst instincts. Ethan said nothing. He only watched. Claire lifted the card between 2 fingers, careful, almost clinical, as if it were not an offer but a misplaced object left on the wrong table. Her expression did not change. Excuse me, sir, she said quietly. Ethan tilted his head. Yes. Her voice remained calm, low enough that only the table could hear, and somehow that made every word land harder. Generous men do not need witnesses. The smile vanished from Grant's face. Victor stared into his glass as if it might suddenly explain what he had just heard. Ethan felt something sharp and unfamiliar move through his chest, not anger exactly, but the sting of being seen too clearly by someone who owed him nothing. Claire rested the black card lightly on her order book, not in her apron, not in her hand like a prize, but like a receipt she intended to process properly. Then she added, I will return this to you when your bill is ready. And just like that, she turned and walked away. No drama, no raised voice, no triumphant pause. Just one sentence and a quiet exit that left 4 wealthy men sitting in the middle of the finest dining room in Manhattan, looking as if they had all misread the same room at once. Grant recovered first, though badly. What was that supposed to mean? Ethan did not answer. His eyes followed Claire as she moved toward the service corridor, where the light dimmed from gold to soft white. She handed a tray to another server, spoke briefly to the floor manager, and disappeared behind the half door leading to the kitchen. She thinks she is clever, Grant muttered. She thinks she is not for sale, Ethan said, setting down his glass with a controlled click against the linen. There is a difference. The table fell silent again. It was subtle, but the mood had shifted. The dinner no longer belonged to Ethan. Not in the way it had 10 minutes earlier. The laughter was thinner now, the confidence more fragile. Even the restaurant seemed to know it. A pianist in the corner moved into something slower, softer. Candlelight trembled against the walls. Nearby, a couple at another table leaned closer over dessert, while a family in the back lowered their voices without knowing why. Marlowe House had always been good at absorbing tension and dressing it as elegance. But some moments refused to disappear into ambience. 10 minutes passed. Then 12. Ethan barely touched his meal. He answered one question from Victor, ignored 2 texts from his assistant, and checked the service station more times than he would ever admit. He told himself it was annoyance, curiosity, pride, anything but the truth. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. Claire Bennett had not just rejected the gesture. She had rejected the premise behind it. She had looked at wealth, status, reputation, and all the invisible leverage Ethan carried into every room, and she had declined to participate. At exactly 19 minutes after she walked away, the floor manager approached their table. Thomas Reeves had been at Marlowe House for 15 years and wore authority the way other men wore tailored suits. Impeccably, but never loudly. In his hands was a small silver check tray. On it sat a cream envelope, folded once, with Ethan's name written across the front in neat blue ink. Not printed. Written. Mr. Cole, Thomas said, his tone respectful and perfectly neutral. Miss Bennett asked that I return this to you personally. Grant leaned forward before he could stop himself. Victor did not even pretend not to stare. Ethan looked at the envelope, then at Thomas. And where is Miss Bennett? Thomas held his expression. Still working, sir. Of course she was. Ethan picked up the envelope. It was heavier than paper should have been. He opened it slowly, and when he saw what was inside, the entire table forgot how to breathe. Inside the envelope sat 3 things. Ethan's black card, the dinner receipt, itemized with brutal precision, and a folded note written in the same neat blue ink as his name on the front. No flourish, no perfume, no performance, just clean handwriting on cream stationery from the restaurant. Grant let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but it died before it became one. Victor stared openly now. Ethan unfolded the note. The message was only one sentence. Your table was charged. I was not. For a moment, Ethan did not move. The sounds of the restaurant returned in fragments. The faint piano, the soft murmur of a nearby anniversary toast, the whisper of polished shoes across hardwood, but all of it felt farther away than it should have. He looked down at the receipt. The full bill had been processed. Every course, every bottle, every indulgent add-on his friends had insisted on ordering because wealthy men liked to confuse excess with freedom. $12,000 for $160. Paid in full. On his card. Properly. Professionally. The tip line beneath it remained blank. Not forgotten. Blank. Grant found his voice first. She is making a point. Ethan lifted his eyes, slow and unreadable. Yes. Grant shifted in his chair, suddenly less amused than he had been all night. That was unnecessary. Victor almost smiled at that. You mean for us or for her? Ethan ignored both of them. He read the note again. Not because it was complicated. Because it was not. Because in 11 words, Claire Bennett had done what competitors, reporters, and board members had failed to do in years. She had forced him to confront the ugliest version of himself without raising her voice. Once, he slid the note back into the envelope and set it beside his untouched bourbon. Across the room, Claire emerged from the service corridor carrying a tray of dessert plates, as composed as if none of this had happened. She moved to a table near the windows where an elderly couple sat shoulder to shoulder over coffee. The woman reached for her purse. Claire stopped her with a gentle hand and a small smile, then pointed toward the man, who was already holding up his card with mock offense. The woman laughed. The old man winked. Claire smiled, but only for a second. It was enough to change her whole face. Ethan watched that moment longer than he meant to. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not in the loud, polished way his world usually rewarded, but in the quieter, more dangerous way that made a man feel observed instead of admired. No, what held him was the ease of her. The fact that she could move from humiliating a millionaire with perfect restraint to helping a 70-year-old couple split a slice of chocolate torte like it was the most important task in the room. "You should let it go," Grant muttered, cutting into his steak at last. "She is a waitress with attitude. There is nothing to figure out." Ethan turned his head slowly. "That is exactly why there is." Victor set down his fork. "You are serious." Ethan glanced at the blank tip line again, then at the note. "A woman in this city who can refuse a black card without blinking is either reckless, brilliant, or tired of being underestimated." He folded the receipt once, precise, and slipped it back into the envelope. "I do not think she is reckless." Grant scoffed. "Come on, Ethan." She served a lesson on embossed paper. "You are really going to chase a moral statement through a restaurant." Ethan stood. His chair slid back across the floor with a soft scrape that still managed to turn heads from two nearby tables. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket, calm as ever, but there was a new edge to him now, less polished, more human. "No," he said, eyes fixed on the service hallway where Claire had just disappeared again. "I am going to apologize." For the first time that evening, no one at the table had a joke ready, and somewhere behind the half door near the kitchen, where warm light met shadow, Claire Bennett was already about to teach him that an apology, like money, meant nothing if it arrived the wrong way. Ethan expected resistance. What he did not expect was order. The service corridor behind Marlowe House was quieter than the dining room, but only by comparison. The polished glamour of the front dissolved here into stainless steel counters, clipped footsteps, murmured table numbers, and the low pulse of a kitchen running at full speed. White light replaced candlelight. Precision replaced performance. Ethan stepped through the half door and stopped just inside, suddenly aware that for the first time in years, he was standing somewhere money did not automatically make him belong. Claire was at the far counter near the espresso station, reviewing a printed ticket with a young busboy whose hands still shook every time he carried a tray. She pointed once to the seat numbers, then once to the order code, calm and patient. "Left side first," she told him. "Ladies clockwise. Breathe before you walk." The kid nodded like she had just saved him from a firing squad and hurried off. Ethan waited until she turned. Claire saw him immediately. Of course she did. Nothing in her expression changed, but she set down the ticket and straightened just enough to make it clear she was no longer helping a coworker. She was handling him. "Mr. Cole," she said, "this area is for staff only." Her voice was still soft, still controlled. Somehow, that made the boundary firmer. Ethan glanced around once, as if seeing the world behind the dining room for the first time. A dishwasher rolled past with a rack of stemware. Someone in the kitchen called for 2 halibut, 1 risotto. A server brushed by with a tray and did a visible double take when he recognized the man standing in a place men like him rarely entered. "I will only take a minute," Ethan said. Claire folded her hands lightly in front of her apron. "Then take the right one." He almost smiled. "Almost. I came to apologize." She tilted her head, just slightly. "For which part?" The question landed cleanly. No sarcasm. No heat. Just clarity sharp enough to cut through ego. Ethan looked at her, and for once in his adult life, the rehearsed confidence failed him. He had negotiated acquisitions worth hundreds of millions. He had handled live television interviews during market crashes. He had sat across from senators, founders, hostile boards, and men who would happily ruin him if it made them richer. But a waitress in a service corridor asking one honest question had somehow made him feel less prepared than any of them. "For allowing the conversation at the table," he said at last. "And for making you part of a game you did not agree to." Claire studied him. Not impressed. Not softened. Just evaluating. "That is closer," she said. Ethan let out a breath through his nose. "Closer. An apology is not a performance, Mr. Cole." She picked up a stack of folded napkins and aligned the corners while she spoke, the gesture small and exact. "If you came back here to ease your conscience, that is still about you. If you came back here because you finally understand what was insulting, that is different." Ethan felt the truth of that before he was ready to admit it. He glanced at the envelope still in his hand, then at the note she had written. "I understood the note." Claire's blue-gray eyes flicked to the cream paper, then back to him. "Did you?" Before he could answer, a line cook appeared at the pass window and called her name. "Claire, table 16 needs the anniversary plate." "Coming." She did not look away from Ethan. "You have 30 seconds." The pressure of that should have irritated him. Instead, it made him honest. "I thought the card would tell me who you were," he said quietly. Instead, it told me who I have become. For the first time all evening, Claire did not answer immediately. Something unreadable moved through her expression, gone so fast he could not name it. Then she reached for the envelope in his hand, slid the note free, and placed it back on top of the stainless steel counter between them. Good, she said. Now prove it where your friends can see. And with that, she picked up a dessert plate dusted with powdered sugar and walked back into the golden light, leaving Ethan Cole alone under the white glare of the service corridor, staring at 11 words that suddenly felt less like an insult and more like an invitation to become a better man. When Ethan stepped back into the dining room, nothing had changed and everything had. The chandeliers still glowed. The pianist still drifted through a slow jazz standard in the corner. Crystal still caught the light like money made visible. But the room no longer felt like his stage. It felt like a mirror. Grant looked up first, irritation already loaded into his expression. Well, Ethan returned to his chair without answering. He placed the cream note beside his water glass. Not hidden now, not folded, not private. Let them see it. Victor noticed immediately. You actually went after her. Ethan picked up the check tray, glanced once at the blank tip line, then set it back down with deliberate care. No, he said. I went to listen. Grant let out a short laugh. To a waitress. Ethan turned his head slowly. If that word is the only thing you heard tonight, then you are proving her right. The table fell silent again, but this time it was not shock. It was discomfort. The expensive kind. The kind men in tailored jackets did not know how to wear. Grant sat back, jaw tightening. You are not seriously taking her side. There is no side, Ethan said. There is behavior. Ours was embarrassing. Victor leaned forward, curious now rather than amused. What did she say? Ethan looked at the note for half a second. Then he looked at all three of them, not as friends, not as drinking companions, but as men he had let become comfortable around the worst parts of him. She said, I can apologize where it matters. Grant scoffed. And where is that? Ethan reached for the bill, pulled out his wallet, slid the black card back into its proper slot this time, not on display, not as a prop, just plastic and metal where it belonged. Then he took the pen. The restaurant seemed to narrow around the motion. Victor watched the check. Grant watched Ethan. Even the waiter at the neighboring table glanced over when he recognized the man from the business pages leaning over a receipt with the focus of someone signing something larger than a dinner bill. Ethan filled in the tip line. Not a flourish. Not an absurd amount meant to buy absolution. A real number. Large enough to matter. Honest enough not to insult. Then below it, in clear block letters, he wrote, for the entire staff. Not for one person. He set down the pen. Grant frowned. You are splitting it. Pooling it. Ethan corrected. Like people do when they understand a team made the night possible. Victor gave a slow nod, impressed despite himself. That is new. It should not be. Ethan signaled for Thomas, the floor manager, who appeared within seconds with the polished calm of a man who had seen every kind of human vanity money could manufacture. Mr. Cole, Ethan handed him the check folder. Please make sure the gratuity is distributed through staff pool. And if Miss Bennett is assigned anything directly, remove it. Thomas's brows moved just enough to register surprise. Certainly, sir. Grant stared. You are still doing what she told you. Ethan's eyes did not leave Thomas. No, I am doing what I should have done before I needed to be told. Thomas accepted the folder and gave the smallest nod of professional respect before stepping away. Around them, the room resumed its elegant rhythm, but not entirely. Two women at a nearby table had clearly noticed. A couple near the bar looked over with quiet curiosity. Wealth had a way of drawing eyes, but humility in a wealthy man drew more. Grant pushed his plate away, appetite gone. This is ridiculous. Ethan folded his napkin and set it beside his unfinished bourbon. No, he said softly. What was ridiculous was thinking a black card made me the one in control. And as he rose from the table for the second time that night, the men who had laughed with him earlier did not laugh now. Because somewhere between the note, the corridor, and the blank tip line, Ethan Cole had begun to understand a truth that made rich men deeply uncomfortable. The most expensive thing in the room was never the card. It was the character of the woman who had refused to let it define her. Claire did not thank him. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. 10 minutes after Thomas collected the check, the atmosphere at Marlowe House had settled into something almost normal again, at least for everyone who had not been seated at table 12. Dessert menus moved. Espresso cups arrived. The pianist shifted into a brighter tune. Grant had retreated into offended silence, Victor into thoughtful observation, and the third man at the table, Daniel Mercer, had finally stopped pretending. The whole evening was funny. Ethan stood near the edge of the dining room now, jacket buttoned, hands still, watching the staff move with the kind of choreography wealth usually ignored. Then Thomas returned, not with a tray this time, but with a small leather folio. "Miss Bennett asked me to give you this, Mr. Cole." Ethan took it. "Another note?" Thomas allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Not exactly, sir." Inside was the signed merchant copy of the receipt. The gratuity had been processed exactly as instructed. Beneath Ethan's handwritten line, in the same neat blue ink Claire used before, she had added 4 words. "Thank you. For the team." That was all. No flourish. No smiley face. No emotional reward for doing the minimum decent thing. Just acknowledgement, stripped clean of sentiment. Ethan stared at the words longer than he should have. Grant noticed. "She's still writing you little lessons?" Ethan closed the folio and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "No," he said quietly. "That one was not for me." Grant rose abruptly, pushing back his chair hard enough to turn one nearby head. "I am done with this. We came here for dinner, not a morality play." Daniel looked up from his coffee. "Maybe that depends on how you treat people." Grant scoffed. "Since when did everyone become philosophers because a server can write in cursive?" Ethan's eyes cooled. "Since a server showed more class than the entire table." Grant opened his mouth, then stopped. There it was again, that rare and useful thing, silence earned. He grabbed his coat and muttered something under his breath before heading toward the exit, ego leading the way. Victor watched him go, then looked back at Ethan. "You know what is bothering you, right?" Ethan adjusted his cuff. "Enlighten me." Victor gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. "You are used to being the one people remember after a night like this. Tonight, you are just a man who got corrected by a waitress and deserved it." Daniel actually laughed at that, soft and surprised. Ethan should have bristled. Instead, he nodded once. "That may be the most accurate thing you have said in years." Victor stood and reached for his coat. "I have an early flight. But for what it is worth, Ethan, do not turn this into a chase." Ethan looked toward the service station, where Claire was helping the hostess reorganize a stack of reservation cards, sleeves rolled back half an inch, focus absolute. "I am not chasing anything." Victor followed his gaze. "Good. Because women like that can smell the difference between curiosity and entitlement from across the room." When Victor and Daniel finally left, the dining room thinned by degrees, becoming softer, looser, more intimate. It was nearing 11. The late crowd was settling in, but the corporate noise had begun to fade. Ethan remained where he was, not because he had nowhere else to be, but because for the first time in a long time, leaving felt too easy. From across the room, he watched Claire kneel beside an older dishwasher who had come out from the back holding his wrist. She examined the swelling with calm attention, disappeared for less than a minute, and returned with an ice pack wrapped in a linen napkin and a small roll of athletic tape from somewhere no server should have known to keep one. She spoke to him quietly, demonstrating how to elevate the arm, then smiled once when he nodded. No fuss, no audience, no waiting for praise. Ethan felt that same sharp realization move through him again. She did not just reject arrogance. She repaired what arrogance overlooked. And standing there beneath crystal light and polished brass, Ethan Cole understood something wealth had hidden from him for years. A person's real status was revealed in the moments no one was supposed to notice. Claire Bennett had been proving hers all night. He had only just learned how to see it. By 11:30, Marlowe House had become a different kind of beautiful. The early bravado was gone. The loud laughter of finance men and luxury tourists had thinned into softer voices, slower meals, and the private kind of elegance that only appeared after the room stopped trying so hard. Candles burned lower. The piano had given way to a quiet playlist drifting through hidden speakers. Outside the tall front windows, Manhattan shimmered in silver and amber, wet streets reflecting headlights like scattered jewelry. Ethan should have been in the back seat of a town car by now, answering emails, reviewing numbers, moving on. Instead, he stood near the bar with a glass of water he had not touched, watching Claire close out table after table with the same exact grace she had. shone when the room was full. She did not slow down when the pressure eased. She became more precise. That, somehow, impressed him most. At table 9, a young couple argued in whispers over a declined credit card, both embarrassed, both trying not to let the other feel worse. Claire glanced once at the terminal, then at the man's face, and quietly removed a dessert charge from the bill before either of them could protest. "The kitchen sent that over by mistake," she said, though Ethan had seen her recommend the chocolate toward herself. The woman's eyes filled for half a second. The man looked like gratitude hurt him. Claire only smiled once, printed the new receipt, and walked away before they could thank her too much. 10 minutes later, near the host's stand, a delivery driver stepped in from the cold with a paper pharmacy bag tucked under one arm, looking confused and underdressed for a place like Marlowe House. He asked the hostess something. The hostess pointed toward the service hall. Claire appeared almost immediately, signed the receipt, took the bag, and slipped cash from her own apron pocket into the man's hand when she saw him counting change too slowly. He shook his head. She closed his fingers over it anyway. No drama. No audience. Just quiet efficiency wrapped in kindness. Ethan watched all of it. Every small correction. Every private mercy. Every moment that would never make a boardroom, a headline, or a quarterly report. And then, because the knight had apparently decided he was not finished learning, he saw her stop near the service station and open the pharmacy bag. Inside was a prescription bottle and a small over-the-counter inhaler. Claire checked the label, nodded once to herself, and slipped both items carefully into the side compartment of her tote bag behind the host's stand. Not for show. Not for anyone else. Just one more responsibility folded into a shift that already looked too full. Thomas passed by with the final reservation ledger. "You heading out after close?" he asked her. "Straight to St. Vincent's," Claire said, stacking menus without looking up. "My brother gets discharged at midnight if the paperwork clears." Thomas's expression softened in a way Ethan had not seen all evening. "How is he?" Claire gave the smallest exhale. "Breathing better." Finally, Thomas nodded. "Take the staff meal with you." Maria packed. "Extra soup. Tell her I said thank you." Ethan did not move. He did not step closer. He did not interrupt. He simply stood there in a room built for excess and listened to the kind of truth that changed a person if they let it. Suddenly, the old watch mark on her wrist made sense. The calm. The extra shift energy stretched too thin, but never breaking. The pharmacy bag. The fact that she carried herself like someone who had no time for offense because life had already assigned her more important things. She had not rejected his card because she hated money. She had rejected it because she knew exactly what money was for and what it was not. Not leverage. Not access. Not permission. Across the room, Claire looked up and caught him watching. This time, she did not look away first. There was no hostility in her expression now. No invitation either. Just a steady recognition that he had finally seen enough to understand the difference. Ethan set down the untouched glass of water and, for the first time that night, walked toward her without a plan, without a line, and without a single thing in his hand that he could use to buy the moment. Claire did not stop working when Ethan reached her. She was stacking the final dessert forks into a linen roll near the service station, sleeves pushed back slightly, the pharmacy bag tucked beside her tote, her attention still divided between closing duties and the clock on the wall, inching toward midnight. Yet when he stepped into her line of sight, she acknowledged him with the smallest lift of her eyes, as if she had expected this version of him eventually, just not on any particular schedule. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice low, steady. "You are still here." Ethan glanced at the nearly empty dining room, then back at her. "I think that is the first honest decision I have made all evening." Something almost like amusement touched the corner of her mouth, but it did not fully become a smile. "That is an expensive place to start." He nodded once. "I can afford the lesson." Claire folded the linen around the forks with careful hands. "Can you?" The question should have sounded sharp. Instead, it sounded tired. Not cruel, just real. Ethan looked at the clock above the service station, then at the pharmacy bag near her tote. St. Vincent's. Her hands paused for half a second, not because he had startled her, but because she was deciding whether to answer. "You were listening." "I was." Claire resumed folding. "My brother has asthma. He was admitted this morning. They are finally letting him go tonight." Ethan felt the weight of that settle in the space between them. The long shift. The quiet refusals. The precision. The way she had guarded her dignity not like a performance, but like a resource she could not afford to waste. How old is he? Ethan asked. 19. Claire tucked the final fork into place. Old enough to think he is invincible. Young enough to forget his inhaler in the middle of winter. This time, the smile came. Brief. Warm. Gone in a second. Ethan found himself smiling back before he could stop it. That sounds expensive in more ways than one. You have no idea. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant around them exhaled into closing time. Chairs were being reset. Glassware counted. The pianist had gone home. Somewhere in the back, someone laughed over staff meal leftovers. The city outside kept moving, bright and indifferent. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Claire's eyes sharpened instantly, and he stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out not a card, but the folded merchant copy of the receipt with her 4 words written across it. Thank you. For the team. He placed it on the counter between them, careful, respectful, as if returning something valuable. I am keeping this, he said. Claire glanced down at the paper, then back up. That is unusual. So was tonight. He drew a slow breath. I do not want your number. I do not want to send a car. I do not want to make your life easier in a way that makes you owe me something. But I do want to say this clearly, while you are still deciding whether to believe it. Claire stood still, listening. Ethan met her eyes and, for once, offered nothing but the truth. You were right. The card was not the insult. The assumption was. And I am sorry for the man who thought power looked like that. Claire said nothing at first. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he understood she was not measuring charm, or status, or whether his apology sounded polished. She was measuring whether it cost him something to say it. Finally, she nodded once. That, she said softly, sounds more like a beginning. Ethan exhaled, the tension leaving him in a way no boardroom victory ever had. Then Claire reached for her tote, slipped the pharmacy bag inside, and lifted the strap over her shoulder. Good night, Mr. Cole. He should have let her go there. Maybe the old version of him would have tried one more line, one more offer disguised as concern. Instead, he stepped aside and held the half door open as she passed from the white light of the service corridor into the cooler blue glow near the front entrance. At the threshold, she paused, not turning fully, just enough. And Ethan? He looked up. Her blue-gray eyes held his for one quiet second. The next time you want to impress a woman, try not using the card at all. Then she walked out into the Manhattan night, carrying a pharmacy bag, a tired smile, and more self-respect than anyone in a $12,000 dinner had managed to bring to the table. Ethan stood there with the door still open, cold air slipping past him, the city loud beyond the glass, and the receipt warm in his pocket. For the first time in years, he understood something money had never been able to teach him. Some women do not raise their voices. They raise the standard. And the right kind of man, if he is lucky, learns to meet it.